Hey everybody, this is Aubrey Chavez from Faith Matters. For today's episode, we brought on Carl Youngblood for a conversation we've been wanting to have for a long time. Carl has spent most of his life helping to build and operate technology companies and has done a lot of deep thinking and writing about how technology is shaping our reality and our future, including how it will affect what it means to be human. Digital technology companies, including behemoths like Facebook, are staking their futures on pushing the boundaries of virtual reality and artificial intelligence. Their project is to create a new reality for human beings, what has come to be called the Metaverse. We brought Carl on to talk about what all of this means. What are the implications for our families and institutions? What are the implications for our faith? And how might the theology of the restored gospel inform how we move forward into this new reality? And what about the technologies that may offer the possibility to dramatically extend our lifespans? What does a faith that honors the centrality of God's creation and that honors death as an essential part of the foreordained plan have to say? These are huge and sobering questions, but they're also really exciting to explore. Bill Turnbull, one of the founders of Faith Matters, also joined us for this conversation. Carl is a co-founder of the Mormon Transhumanist Association, an organization founded to consider the intersection between our faith and the frontiers of technology. MTA is hosting a conference in Provo this spring on Saturday, March 19th, at which nationally recognized experts on things like blockchain, crypto, and Web3 will be addressing the implications of these technologies for society, and by extension, for our faith. I'll tell you more about how to register for the conference at the end of the episode. Faith Matters has no affiliation with MTA and offers no opinion on their approach, but we really want to acknowledge their efforts in addressing some of the biggest questions of our day. Thanks so much for listening. We really hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Carl Youngblood.
Well, Carl, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. It's our pleasure. This conversation grew out of a lunch conversation that we had previously on really a lot of the same topics, and we thought that it was so interesting talking with you that we needed to bring you in the studio and actually hash some of this out. One good place to preface this may be a news item that's been circulating, and that is that Facebook, the ubiquitous social media network, has actually changed its name to Meta. A lot of people might wonder why that is, and let's talk a little bit about Meta, about the Metaverse. But once we sort of talk about what's gone on there, then we'll change the direction of the conversation a little bit and get into how this affects our spirituality and our faith, which is obviously why we're bringing it to Faith Matters. So could you talk a little bit about what happened with Facebook? What's the Metaverse? All of that to start.
Yeah, sure. So, Facebook recently announced a name change to Meta and talked about this concept called the Metaverse. And it's been referred to in various terms, but I think one of the most common industry terms is like virtual reality as well as augmented reality. So VR and AR. Okay. And the concept is that, our experiences in computing, especially in like gaming and other kinds of immersive settings, are becoming more and more indistinguishable from reality, right? And Facebook has been working in this space for a few years now already. They have one of their lead devs, John Carmack, is really famous as a kind of gaming developer, and he's been working really heavy in this space. And they've been doing some great work that is making it possible for everyday people to kind of experience VR in a less, it used to be extremely expensive to buy this equipment. It's getting cheaper. And I've tried it. It's pretty fun. I still find that it's a little bit clunky, right? You got this big headset on,
right?
Kind of make it so that you are seeing, you're kind of immersed into the environment. But the idea is that this trend is just going to continue, and it's going to become more and more similar to the everyday life that we're experiencing right now. And who knows, but someday it might be almost indistinguishable from the experiences that, we're having at the table here, just talking to each other. So that's kind of,
but also maybe enhanced in ways why would you just want to replicate your own experience if you could have a different?
Well, definitely. I mean, I would say every new technology has allowed us to do things that we couldn't do before. So a great example is email, right? With email, I can reach someone anywhere on the globe in moments, and it used to have to wait to send a paper letter. I mean, I think some of us here are old enough to have written actual.
Maybe a couple letters. Of us. I don't know about everybody else.
And so it's amazing to be able to reach people, but at the same time, in email, as we all know, we've often failed to convey all of the intent that we had, and sometimes caused problems because we like wrote something a little hastily and then it was misinterpreted by the other person. So we use emojis or whatever else to kind of like fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
And so like it was a new technology that enabled awesome new things, but it also had some drawbacks or differences between, say, talking to someone on the phone or whatever it was that we did before. And I think in a similar way, virtual reality, it allows us to like talk as though we were face to face with someone who might be very far away from us, right? But it also introduces, you know, new challenges. And I'm sure we can imagine what some of those are. We've maybe experienced some of those, and probably there's stuff we haven't even thought of that is also going to be a challenge, right? So yeah.
So I wonder, you know, I'm thinking back to all of, you know, the technological developments of the last 30 years, like, you know, making long distance phone calls even versus FaceTime. Like there are a lot of ways that it feels like that kind of technology really brought us together and made us more connected. But is it possible that like we've reached some sort of tipping point where it's actually becoming disconnecting? You know, like even Facebook, when it first came out, it was so exciting and connecting because you could find people that you really had no way to find. Like they were just gone from your life, and it was so fun to dig up old relationships and and make these connections and like have real friendships with these people. But it seems like there's a way that we've sort of like crossed over to the other side, and now even our, you know, I feel like everywhere we go, you'll see like groups of teenagers that are together and all on their phones in their virtual friendships, you know, like messaging each other, and they're sitting next to a real relationship. So is it possible that like in this case, the evolution of technology is actually more disconnecting than connecting?
I mean,
maybe for the first time even.
I definitely think that that's a significant challenge with this new technology. You know, it's interesting that a lot of people talked about how they found their tribe on the internet, right? And some folks, especially who felt a little marginalized or different from maybe their community, wherever they happen to be, could suddenly find the other 100 weirdos in the world who were just like them, right?
Yeah.
And so that was amazingly validating for these people. But at the same time, you know, if we find ourselves more and more connected and online and interacting with these other folks, then sometimes the relationships in our immediate vicinity might suffer as a result, right? And then also just the fact that we seem to be like always craving novelty and seeking new information. And so like I think there's also a kind of dopamine rush that we get from seeing the new things that are happening, even if when you look back you're like, actually that wasn't really that useful. The last hour I spent scrolling my Facebook feed didn't really help me that much. But at the time it's like really, you know, it's for some reason it's kind of addictive. And so I think both of those things that potentially could sort of cause harm to our other relationships, right? Or just to our ability to like get outside and you know, have an experience in the actual world and stay healthy and other things like that. So I think it's a really big challenge, and the question of like where it becomes more negative than positive is difficult to answer, right? But I think we see that.
Well, paint us a picture of where the metaverse is going. Like, what is this vision? What could be possible in this?
Yeah, so I think that it's really amazing. I mean, I think the goal is to provide a more and more realistic experience that eventually would be almost indistinguishable from our actual embodiment, our bodily experience. So, right now we're kind of trying to approximate it by putting a screen in front of your eyes, but you can imagine some way of possibly tapping into a person's nervous system to the point where they really would feel like they were seeing and hearing and touching and all experiencing all the things that they.
So all of the senses we have now, would there be new senses as well, or
possibly? Although it's like, what would they be like? We can hardly even conceive of what that might be, but yeah, perhaps, you know.
So pleasure, you can imagine deriving a lot of pleasure that maybe most of the pleasure you receive in life, you can imagine receiving that in these virtual networks.
Right, and an especially like kind of concerning aspect of that is this notion that it's possible to potentially stimulate the pleasure centers of the brain directly without having to actually experience anything in a way. And so, and there's a term in the sort of circle of people who talk about this stuff called wireheading, which is talking about just this and the danger that it could be that people could become very addicted to that and sort of bypass everything and almost like stop living and just kind of be seeking the next.
You could basically live most of your life there. You still have to, like, every once in a while go to the bathroom or something like that, like check out something to eat.
Or maybe you just hook up a
Just
catheter.
Maybe it's a catheter, yeah.
Right. I mean, it's scary to think about, right? So,
Is there an idea that you could actually upload your consciousness eventually into this, and you become that becomes like the next iteration of you, and you're some immortal, or like what?
Definitely.
Where's this thing go?
I mean, there are some folks who talk about this. There's even some interesting TV shows that have been made.
Yeah.
Like Amazon Prime Video, I think, recently had this show of a guy who died somehow in a freak accident, but then he was uploaded to this place, and I can't remember what it was called, but anyway, so it's in the collective, like, popular consciousness right now, this idea that, could we eventually be uploaded to a computer?
Right.
And my sort of response to that is that it is a possibility, but it would need to be an experience that is at least as rich as what we're having right now, if we were to ever do that, right? And I'm not ruling it out as a possibility, but I'm just saying, like, there are many amazing things. I mean, I think we all still feel like being alive is pretty amazing, most of us, hopefully,
But there are a lot of people that like to numb and check out of life, too. And if they had a compelling alternate reality, that maybe didn't present some of the challenges that life presents.
Yeah.
Maybe an increasing number of people do that.
There's been some interesting explorations of this in science fiction as well, where, like, the idea that if you were placed in some kind of computational alternate reality, if it didn't provide you with all of the different sensory inputs that your brain currently expects, that it could actually cause insanity or other problems, right? So I think it would need to be something that didn't that was sufficient, that fooled your brain enough to think that it was, whatever it was experiencing was really real.
Yeah, I mean, and this gets to the nature of reality itself and what we experience as reality, right?
Yeah.
Like one sort of funny analogy, maybe. Well, starting with like the Matrix, right, which I've seen on VidAngel, obviously, but it's like Neo is offered basically the choice, so that he discovers that he's living in a purely computed world, and that his own body is a computation, but his actual body is somewhere else, just being fed signals, right? And he doesn't have any real life whatsoever. And within the simulation, he's offered the choice to continue living in the computation and not even realize it, and basically the that's called the Matrix, right? And it's just as real as everything that we're experiencing right now. And it seems, as the viewer in that moment, that you wouldn't take that, right? Obviously you would go for the real reality, which is his body sitting in a plastic container somewhere, because that's real and it must be more fulfilling regardless of how bleak it is. And then, just to contrast that, I don't know if you guys have watched The Office at all, but there is an opening scene, or I think it's a deleted scene actually, where one of Jim's classic pranks on Dwight is that he makes Dwight believe that he's actually living in the Matrix. It's this elaborate stage thing. And when the moment comes for Dwight to choose, do I keep living in the Matrix, or do I experience this greater reality? Dwight says, look, I've got a great life. I've got a job I love. I'm engaged to the woman I love, is kind of how he frames it. And he says, I'm just going to keep living in the Matrix. And Jim obviously is shocked because he has the rest of the prank is all laid out, and Dwight sort of, for the first time, doesn't go through with it. But like, the question is, like, if we can actually replicate.
We're going to refer to that episode in the show notes, I assume.
Yeah, exactly. I think we need to. We'll also link to the Matrix, the VidAngel version. And I guess the question is, like, if we get to a point where we can replicate reality so perfectly in all of our senses, then is there some inherent virtue in reality itself over this replicated reality? And does our spirituality and our faith have something to say about that? I'm not sure what the answer is.
Is what we're experiencing now really the bedrock of reality, or is there more? And what shape might that take? And I think that for those of us who've already come, or who are coming from a religious background, where we've been taught that we've been given here on this mortal sphere an opportunity to grow and progress and learn, it sounds an awful lot like maybe we were inhabiting some other realm and that we were embodied here. And who knows, we were placed into a VR machine or something, in order to
we're already in a simulation.
No, it seems like
Elon Musk, I think, said that. I think we're already in a simulation, which is there's an interesting argument. Can we stipulate that we like, at least for purposes of the conversation, that we're not living in a simulation, that this is an actual conversation?
I can't prove it. I don't know. So anyway, but it does allow for the possibility of things that seem miraculous to actually make sense, if that makes sense.
Well, and philosophers have sort of been getting at this for a long time too, in the sense that whatever it is that we're experiencing right now may not be as real as what may be to come, right? So Plato's cave, like, for what we might be experiencing is relative to what we could experience in the future. I mean, and this obviously gets into faith very heavily, very quickly, but like might just be shadows on a wall. And C.S. Lewis in the Last Battle, in the final book of the Chronicles of Narnia, sort of describes their progression as after they've sort of completed their mortal journey into these sort of successive kingdoms that are more and more and more real.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's too far off of what Latter-day Saint theology has to say about it.
Right. Now, the one caution I would give about this sort of Shadowlands concept is that I think one of the dangers of it, and it's a perennial problem for religious folks, is this idea that if you really discount the experience we're having right now and say it's less real than heaven or wherever we want to get to, we can start to get to the point where whatever is happening in this world is not that important, and we just need to wait for the next world, and it can become a kind of form of escapism. And so even if whatever awaits us is wonderful and glorious, I think it's really important that we don't completely disconnect our present state with that future state. And in fact, I see the Christian message as one that says that we are supposed to be renewing, and the New Jerusalem is here. The new kingdom or world that we anticipate is something we're supposed to be building and contributing to right now and here, and it's not something that happens in some ethereal realm that's somewhere else. And so I think we're being called to actually transform the world rather than escape it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Can I how quickly is this on our doorstep? I have two questions. And the first one is, this sounds like it's out there, like it's science fiction, but it's becoming less and less science fiction and more reality. And when large companies are building their future around it right now, it's something we need to take much more seriously than we perhaps did. And then I just want to explore, like, what is this fundamental human impulse that is pushing us in this direction? Like, I wonder if we can even identify that, because seems an important question. Definitely.
Well, I love the way, there's some interesting scriptural parallels here as well, where we, sometimes talks about like the events of the last days coming as a thief in the night, right? Like all of a sudden everything's happening, right? And I think that in a similar way, the progress in the arc of technology and development happens, it often surprises us because, we think, I think our brains are conditioned to kind of think linearly, where we're basically just thinking, oh yeah, the next 100 years of technological progress will be similar to, say, the last 100 years. But what actually happens is that each generation uses the tools that have been invented to do things even faster than the generation previous. So if you think about how hard it is to maybe build a new company today and all the tools that are at your disposal, it's like way easier than it was even a few decades ago. And so each, that is an accelerating trend. And so it looks more exponential than linear, right? Yeah. And the weird thing about exponentials is that, it seems like nothing's happening, and then all of a sudden, from like one day to the next, everything changes, And so I think it is good to be concerned about that, and that we actually have to fight against our natural human impulses and be vigilant, because we're not used to that kind of trajectory, Yeah.
So what about I want to hear what you think about his second question. Like, why do we like want to change so quickly and grow? Like, what is it in us, do you think, that makes us feel so motivated to just find out what's next, even if we're not even sure if it will necessarily be good for us?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I almost want to say that I'm not even sure if it's like something we want to do so much as just an inevitability. Like, it's just the way things progress. They seem to progress in kind of an exponential way. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that probably Facebook, to bring it back to this particular question about the metaverse, which, by the way, like that term metaverse, I guess there was a few companies and other places that had the same term in their logos.
That's what I heard. Yeah,
being obliterated by Facebook, or someone had an Instagram account with that name and she lost it, and anyway. But yeah, suddenly when they get into it, everyone wonders, like, how concerned should we be about this? But
well, I mean, I have grandchildren, and I have to consider the possibility that they're going to be lured into this new, that this is just going to be a natural part of their experience, this increasing engagement with the metaverse, right? So if that's something that is on our doorstep, like, that has profound implications, moral and otherwise, some really practical ones too.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I'm satisfied by your answer to the question of what that impulse is, that it's just some sort of inevitable thing that's built into us. I mean, I'm really curious about, like, what is that impulse that wants us to get beyond present experience to, like, and does it get hijacked? Is there some impulse that's like that's a natural and even noble impulse that's getting hijacked here? I'm curious. I'm just deeply curious about that.
Well, the cynic in me, and I imagine that I'm representing some listeners' views here when I say that there may be an element of greed in a system of unfettered capitalism that allows this to happen, right? Like, where's Facebook's next advertising dollar coming from? You're like, they've had very negative trends in the past year with the sort of disappearance of web cookies, their ability to, like, track people as effectively. And so you can imagine a board meeting pretty easily, I think, at Facebook that says, okay, well, we can no longer grow, 30, 50% a year, or whatever they've been doing for the past, 5-10 years. Like, where are we heading with this? And there doesn't seem to ever be any system in place with these huge $1 trillion plus technology companies that says should we do this rather than can we do this? And like, and in American capitalism, or just more generally than that, even, should there be some sort of some question that we ask? Because right now we're barreling there.
Yeah,
it's legislation and regulation is obviously way behind. Can't keep up with the speed that you're talking about with technology. And so how do we decide if we actually want to go somewhere before we go there?
It's worth noting that what brought us together for that lunch is that it was just a few weeks ago. It wasn't that long ago, but it was on the heels of Facebook and Instagram. It's other company, sister company, were being excoriated in the Congress, and they'd been laid, like, their intentions and the damages that social media have caused were being laid bare in front of the nation by journalists, by Congress, and it just looked really bad for Zuckerberg and company, and then in the middle of that, he's almost like, oh wow, this isn't going to go well for us. Let's just be transparent about what our next step is, which is now Metaverse.
Yeah.
And it sounds very ominous, right? But especially in the hands of large corporations. And we can talk about that. Our conversation went into, like, Web3 and other things that are maybe a little bit more, possibly more hopeful. But the Metaverse idea is like, the impulse, I don't know, maybe we should just defer that question, because I don't think we've.
I actually think it's a great question, and it does deserve more attention. And I think that we could go back, we could cast our minds back to, like, the earliest, most primitive state of humanity that we could imagine, and we could say that humans have always, their reach has always exceeded their grasp, so to speak. And so we've always wanted to do something to bring our environment into a greater sense of control, or to achieve our goals with it, right? And so sometimes people think of technology as like whatever is super advanced, but actually, just clothing is a form of technology, right? And glasses and, a peg leg or a crutch or whatever. Those are all forms of technology, but they're so, every day that we don't even think of them as that important. In fact, there's this funny quote from Douglas Adams where he's like, everything that was invented before you were born is basically old stuff, and everything that you could currently get a job at is like cool and fun, and then everything that hasn't been invented yet is crazy stuff that you would never imagine doing, and so each of us based on where we were born and what we're used to having around, think of some things as unnatural and crazy and other things as old hat, right? And so I think this tendency to want to just build tools that make life better is where that impulse comes from, and I think it's deeply, deeply human. In fact, I think that you almost can't pick a time period when we were truly and most quintessentially human. You can't say, that the 1500s is what it was like to be a human, and now we've just gone crazy and off the rails, right? It's like there's something about humanity that transcends a specific time and place. It's almost an orientation that we have, that we want to always reach beyond, right? And I think that impulse is good, but it does have potential negative consequences, right? And we're constantly facing those challenges, right? I think that the history of humanity, as far as we've been able to determine it, is one of inventing new things, but then side effects that are sometimes negative of those things, sometimes even the point of habitat destruction or extinction, other things like that. So they're really big challenges. And so just to address that just general topic, I think we could talk about it for a long time, but it's not like all bad, but it definitely has a lot of potential negative consequences. Right?
And are you saying that you think in general that the pros outweigh the cons, and to the extent that this same system that we have in place, where we're constantly reaching and developing new technologies, is the right system to have?
I don't know if I wouldn't say that the way we've structured our society is like ideal or whatever. I think like you were talking about some of the excesses of capitalism and other challenges like that. I definitely think there are other ways of doing things. In fact, one interesting book that I've been reading lately is David Graeber's The Dawn of Everything. But he talks about and attempts to explore what we can say about the past, ways that humans have organized themselves, and point out that actually this particular trajectory we're on right now is only one of many, and that people have organized themselves in very different ways in the past, and that it's possible for us to change the ways we organize ourselves. So I think that's an interesting and hopeful narrative, right? And so I'm not saying that everything is like ideal the way it is right now, but I do think I'm generally an optimist in terms of like, I think that
that's true. He is very optimistic.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I love that about Carl.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I actually think optimism is almost an imperative. It's like if you take a pessimistic view that this is going to go nowhere fast and that we have no way of stopping this train we're on and everything's going to be bad, right? I think that ultimately that can become almost a self-fulfilling thing, right? That if you can't see a better alternative, then you're not even going to try to pursue it, right? And so I think optimism is something we should have, right?
Can I bring scripture into this? Because this comes from our lunch actually yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's a scripture in John, I think it's John 10:9 or 10, where Jesus says, I can't remember exactly but he says, a thief comes in. You talk about a thief in the night, right? How this can come upon us. Like it's coming upon us faster than we imagine, like kind of like a thief in the night. And then Jesus said, but I am come that you might have life and that you might have it more abundantly. And I'm just wondering if there is this impulse to experience life more abundantly. And my meditation teacher would say, like, life is full as it is. We're always like reaching for more, but if you can realize life is full, then that's enough. That's sufficient for us, right? And we're looking for something we're looking for it to be more than it is. But I'm also open to this idea, especially in the season of Advent, where Advent's is like the season where we open our minds to new possibilities, like Christ coming into the world. Mm-hmm. And so is it like, am I trying to imagine this situation where technology could be like Christ entering the world in new ways, and I should be open to it? Mm-hmm. And so I'm almost like I'm trying to put on my Carl Youngblood, like way of looking at things. But then my mindfulness practice tells me, like, life is enough, and the way we don't need to create alternate realities. This world is, we just begun to realize how amazing this world is if we just become aware of it and open our eyes to it, right? Why go out trying to create new realities? So that's like that's where I kind of come back to.
Yeah. Well, and is there a danger, sort of like Carl was alluding to, of saying, like, this great new virtual reality in the true sense, like, is coming, and it's going to be able to replicate everything we've got and more. Does that lead me to discard what we've got here? Like, we've only got one Earth, like, and within our vast, fairly vast realm of scientific knowledge, there's no other planet even close to like people talk about going to Mars, and that sounds bleak, frankly, to me. How, like, is there not a danger if we're willing to embrace the type of technology of throwing away the best thing we've got, right now, which is an incredible gift, I think, is the way that people of faith look at it.
And that seems like I guess I'm realizing that I see social media as sort of like the seed of this metaverse that we're talking about. And so if the fruits of being on your screen all the time and disconnecting from real friendships are not good, then, like, how is this down the line? How is this going to be something that is actually life-giving and feeds our soul? If we're already, like, really struggling, and, like, mental health wise, we're having so many new issues that seem to be directly caused by our social media consumption, especially in teens. So it just feels like, if that's the seed, like, what are we planting?
Yeah, I mean, I share a lot of these concerns. And what's interesting is that you almost have to wait until you're in the middle of them before you even realize that it's a problem, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting that a lot of reactions to these kind of technology gone awry are that we need to kind of go back to a more pristine, ideal state that we imagine for ourselves, right? And a lot of those are almost like, once again, kind of escapist, in the sense that they often imagine the good old days in a way that's, like, not even exactly accurate, right? They forget that in those good old days there were other challenges and other problems, and people died of all sorts of diseases or whatever that we don't have now. And so I don't want to say that these fears are unwarranted and that these concerns aren't real or aren't important at all, but just more say that we can only go forward from the point we find ourselves in, and that we need to seek to actively shape the tools that we build to make our lives better. And I think we are seeing some people try to do this, right? We're seeing people react to some of this, the ways that we get us, engrossed in our devices and stuff. We're already seeing, like, Apple, for example, build features into iOS that actually help you focus, or that, like, say, I don't want to be bothered by someone texting me right now, like, please go away, So I think this is on everyone's minds, and they're moving towards it, probably in halting steps, right? We're still not doing everything we could. We still need to do more, and we're still going to have a lot of problems in the future. But I don't know how to go backwards, Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great
point. Does
our
religion have anything helpful? Is there anything unique about our religion that can inform this this headlong rush into this? Like, is there a perspective that we offer the world that could be actually, like, salvific in a way?
Yeah.
Well, one aspect of just LDS theology that I find very inspiring is the idea that the physical is not something dirty or inferior or something that's only transitory right now, but that actually spirit and body inseparably connected are how to receive a fullness of joy in the only way, right? And so I think that all of the experiences we're having here, where we're interacting with the world and trying to shape things, hopefully for the better, is part of this inevitable journey that we have to be on, and that we shouldn't be trying to escape the world so much as, well, once again, transform it into a world that more perfectly resembles Christ, right? And all the things we hope for, basically.
Because it does seem like, now, Aubrey, this is like, especially for, this might especially resonate with women, right? Because women's experience is so embodied, like, right? I think particularly of conception and like when you conceive and deliver a child, it's like it's a brush with death, kind of. It's like it's a very physical experience, and nurturing those lives, and it's hard. It's easy to look at where the direction this is going is very disembodied, which is exactly the opposite direction that our religion says to go. Like we came here to be embodied, actually, and to live in this body and experience and death, even experience death, right? Death is our teacher. It's hard, like it's easy to imagine this technology going in a direction where we no longer, like we sort of try to eliminate suffering, and we try to eliminate those things and death and those things that actually teach us the most deeply. And since we really believe in that to an extent that I don't think I've seen that reflected in any other Christian faith, that affirmation of embodiment and even death, for example. We look at a forest and we see the trees, we see it's rising up, but most of the interesting thing that's going on in a forest is on the forest floor or under the forest floor, where there's a lot of death going on and deconstruction, and that brings new life. Like life and death are in the natural world. Life and death are so inextricably linked that one can't exist without the other. And I think that has important things to teach us as well. So I just wonder, in this metaverse world, if we're trying to extinguish some of those things that Nephi may have been right. Death can seem like an awful monster, but I also think like life without death could be hell.
Right. Well, and outside of the metaverse, just in our real life right now, is that our goal, to advance technology so much that we can just never die? Like that feels like one more thing that we haven't even paused to consider should that even really be our goal?
Yeah, I texted some news to this group about an anti-aging, like $100 million had been invested in an anti-aging company, and Carl responded, "Hey, that's great news," and Bill said, dot.
Oh yeah.
So I think there was illustrated some potentially diverging viewpoints on that.
Yeah, totally. Well, one thing that's really interesting also, that there are seeds in our own sort of religious tradition that technology and science and the things that we're doing to sort of improve our condition here may be just an aspect, that the same aspects of humanity that we're talking about are an aspect of godliness, really. And that God doesn't actually do things by magic, so to speak, right? But that actually when for example, there's this really just casual passage in the Book of Mormon that I find quite fascinating, where I think Mormon is saying, I was wondering if the three Nephites had to experience a change in their bodies. And he said, I have since inquired of the Lord. And he said that, yes, they would have actually died if they had not undergone some kind of a physical change in order to live forever, right? And so the idea there is that actually God is changing something with their physical structure in order to achieve immortality. It's not just some sort of like aloha hamora, kind of like
well, that only unlocks things, so I'm not sure why that would do anything, but
but that's a really cool point. Like you're basically saying, like, is God working through technology to heal us?
Absolutely. I really feel that way, and I feel that I could just cart out a bunch of quotes from early leaders of the church.
I think we should probably actually have this conversation, because this gets into the whole transhumanist project,
Yeah.
which is super interesting, actually.
Definitely.
And I have some real reservations about, but I found it actually, they're asking incredibly interesting questions and having incredibly interesting discussions about this. And so we probably should devote some time to just talking about that.
Yeah, definitely.
Can you define transhumanism? Can you?
Yeah. So it's a weird word that, seems a little strange at first, but it's actually was first used by Dante. And he talked about it as a way of going beyond what is human, sort of like approaching the angels or the gods or whatever. But it really, I like to think of it as that to be human is to be in a state of transition towards something greater. And so transhumanism is just kind of like trying to make that more concrete and say, that humans are always trying to transcend their boundaries and move beyond to something even more than they're currently
But it's
capable
beyond
of.
something that we wouldn't recognize today as human experience.
Perhaps, depending on
I mean,
how...
that's what transhuman means. Like you're in this state between what we now recognize as human experience and some other kind of experience that we might not, like looking ahead, you might say that's not even human.
Perhaps and often people will use a term like post-humanity to talk about some sort of state that's sufficiently advanced that it no longer resembles what we currently think of as human, right? But I think that in that term is sort of, embedded this idea that that's in our nature, right? To always transcend, right? Yeah.
And so is the idea that we are helping that transcendence along through these technologies, or that this is something that's going to happen in the same way that any evolution happens naturally?
I think it's definitely it's kind of both of those things, but I think more than anything it's sort of like just calling attention. In fact, that's what I often say, that the transhumanist movement has called attention to this exponential change more than probably any other movement, and trying to help people to both identify it, recognize it, and then kind of be aware of the potential risks and benefits of those changes, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds like for you at least, the transhumanist movement generally actually has a lot in line with sort of Latter-day Saint theology. Is that right?
Well, so it's interesting. We some friends and I kind of were getting together regularly at somebody's house, and just on a monthly basis, like we had this forum where we could kind of talk about whatever and explore a lot of interesting philosophical ideas. And we noticed these trends, and we were like, it's really interesting that a lot of the progress of technology in these so-called latter days almost seems eerily similar to some of the predictions of religious prophets and other people who've talked about this day when all the secrets will be revealed and shouted from the rooftops, and when
that's interesting.
Amazing, miraculous things will be happening. And we said, well, what if it's going to happen in just like a slightly different way than we thought?
Yeah.
And maybe you read, imagine, for example, what a primitive person writing in the biblical times how they would have even tried to describe something if they had seen like that in vision or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So we were just starting to think, wow, what if this is how some of it's going down? And we then even went to the next step, which was like, wait, what if some of these things that we're predicting about the future depend on our choices and actions now? And it's not just something that's absolutely inevitable that we can just passively wait for, but what if that bright and hoped for future that we all look forward to is something that actually depends on us to some degree, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think, that seems to me that potentially is just the logical extension of ideas that we already accept fully, which, like, for example, we hear that in today's day and age, as Latter-day Saints, when someone is really ill and suffering, like, you'd want to lay your hands on their head and give them a blessing, but you also want to take them to the hospital or the doctor, because we consider that to be those medical technologies and scientific advances to be a gift from God as well. And so it's really just taking that sort of to its logical extent and saying, yes, God works through us and works through technology, in addition to potentially I guess the things that we don't understand how the process might work.
Absolutely. Like, I see that our story, both as Latter-day Saints and in the broader picture of humanity, as one of where we're always seeking to do more where we can see ways of improving things, but also where we are caught in the moment right now, and life can't wait always for the challenges that we have. And we do our best, we pray, we hope for a better, we bless people, but we also don't take for granted the things that have already been discovered through inspiration from God, right? And in fact, you know, our history is replete with admonitions from our leaders of, like, you know, you should definitely take advantage of the vaccine, or, you know, whatever kinds of technological blessings are available, to the extent we can. But obviously there's always going to be times when we can't, or when whatever we have at our disposal is not enough. And I truly believe that God is there to help us in those moments, right? And I think that it's important that we don't discard either of those, that we don't say, oh, I'm just going to rely exclusively on my own awareness and know-how and whatever humanity has done already. But that it's almost a collaborative, cooperative effort with God.
Yeah. I love that idea, because I feel like creativity seems to be like at the real core of connection to God. And so I definitely feel resistance to this idea that maybe this progress could be like inherently bad, because it just feels like that is so connecting to like use all of your gifts and talents and experience to create something new. That feels like how, you know, the way we emulate God, like the closest we can emulate God in some ways. And so I love the idea of like, we need presence. We need to be in the now and really experiencing everything around us, and using everything we have to be like God and create with everything that we have.
So maybe that comes closest to answering that impulse question. What is the impulse that's driving toward this?
Creativity.
Is that right? Yeah, creativity and like a desire to ameliorate the human condition, maybe a desire for greater connection, but
to each other,
to each other, like that seems to me part of that enterprise. But it's also like the question still is real. Like, is this impulse can it be, and is it being hijacked in certain ways? It's like that.
Yeah. Well, I think all of us have experienced these moments where we're just in absolute awe and even profound joy at seeing some amazing accomplishment, right? We look at the Wright brothers' first flight or whatever, or Neil Armstrong setting foot on the moon, or other landmark achievements of humanity, and tears come to our eyes, and the entire world is connected together in those moments, right? And the world sees that as a joint achievement and not just this one man, right? And I think those are really can be profoundly moving experiences.
We can even look at it as like a step in theosis, in our progress in our progression toward becoming gods, which that's another unique,
absolutely,
like Latter-day Saint, not necessarily unique, but in the Christian world at least, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is one of our greatest hits, and I hope that we never, hide that talent under a bushel. And I see that was another aspect of transhumanism that I felt really kind of gelled well with LDS theology, was this idea of that it's not only our goal, or but it's our destiny, right, to become as our heavenly parents are, and that
which is learning step by step along the way.
Absolutely, yeah.
We're treading some path that they also trod, right? They didn't
right,
magically become the beings that they became. They became those beings, right?
Yeah, and maybe that's the best answer to this impulse. Maybe this is a godly impulse, right? And so we shouldn't shy away from it or be afraid of it, but we definitely should be cautious about the ways that it can be exercised negatively, right?
Well, I wonder if there is a counterfeit. I'm thinking of like the Sunday school lesson we've all had growing up, that every like godly feeling has some sort of counterfeit and or some like soulless version of itself that can be confused. Like, is there a counterfeit of this sort of like godly creativity that looks soulless and barrels forward without any thought.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's an interesting way of framing it. One of the things we thought of is we were thinking of ways that bringing this perspective of like our divine destiny into the question of human progress is that maybe it could improve the motivations that we have for doing these things, right? So whereas those who are maybe pursuing this from a completely secular perspective of just like improvement at all costs,
or greed, like you're saying.
They almost might have a brazen approach to innovation where it's like, I'm going to do this by hook or by crook. And in fact, in the scriptures, we have an example of that didn't go so well, right? It's the sort of allegorical Tower of Babel, right?
Right.
Where
It's a pretty good
Ooh, that's a really good, yeah.
Absolutely.
That's a great point.
But I mean, I think that part of we can attribute various reasons why it went wrong, right? But I think that the message is just that, pursuing something without an understanding of its greater purpose could be self-destructive, right? And ultimately doesn't achieve the goals that God has for humanity, right? So I think that
it's also worth bringing up that the result of that was that everyone ended up with a different language, which they started out with a common understanding of the world, and then it ends up in this mass fragmentation where you don't even share the same. A language is the way you see reality, right? And you can kind of see that in the way this is playing out today, where you've got people separating into tribes. They don't even share the same set of assumptions anymore, the same set of facts. It's like our languages have been confounded, So
That's a really interesting point.
That's a great way of like making that story more current for our current time.
Yeah.
I enjoy it. That's interesting. I mean, I think that we can find in these biblical passages like applications to our current challenges, and that's what they're best for, in my opinion. Is not to try to pinpoint their exact what time and place did they occur, but more
this
like
is our first Old Testament.
There you go.
Exactly.
January.
Yep. Right, to our current challenges, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Carl, will you kind of sum up this conversation? What do you feel like is the takeaway for a Latter-day Saint family who, is unsure about where this is going, is maybe recognizing some of the problems that they have right now with technology in their own family? What is the takeaway?
Yeah. So as I think about this, one thing that comes to mind right away is this great talk by Elder Neil A. Maxwell, where he talked about two types of Latter-day Saints. He said there are some who disengage from the world and who kind of try to flee and escape and almost seem to delight when bad things happen because they think, I guess, that the end is nigh or whatever. But then there are others who he says won't, leave their posts even while the turbulent Nineveh still stands, right? And he describes them as being more like Joseph, who in an alien culture was still able to make friends and interact and help people out of the famine that they experienced and really be an instrument for positive change in the world. And so I think our calling is not to escape from the world, but to recognize that there are challenges, that new technologies bring both blessings and potential negative consequences, to recognize that we can't go backwards, that we have to move forward from where we're at, but not completely disengage, right?
Because you could disengage, and a lot of Latter-day Saints will say, this is crazy. Now, this is that scenario where the world is going to become unwound.
Right.
Jesus is going to come save us. Let's pull in the
Build up our
drawbridges. And there's a narrative that would lead to disengagement there.
Right. Absolutely.
And if we disengage, then also what we could bring to the conversation gets lost. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's that could be a tragedy.
I agree.
Took that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the calling is really for us to engage with the world, not to see all of this as universally negative, but to recognize that it has some challenges and to prayerfully, work through those.
Cool. Thank you so much, Carl. Appreciate your insights. Before we go, I know your organization's got a conference coming up that sounded really interesting. Do you want to give the quick pitch on that?
Yeah, I'd love to. So We are doing a conference on the topic of decentralization of power and why this decentralization is really important for us to avoid some of the challenges that we're talking about with concentration of power in the hands of corporations and other things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And also how this plays out in a lot of technologies that are up and coming today. We're bringing in some top speakers, both in the technology space as well as the LDS space. So we have a keynote speaker who's a famous podcaster, Laura Shin, who has really been covering the blockchain community really well. And another Mormon keynote speaker who is Tamika Tilleman, who is at Andreessen Horowitz, one of the major venture capital firms that is funding a lot of the companies that are building new things in blockchain technology. And a lot of other fun speakers who are talking about various things related to decentralization. And that's going to take place March 19th on a Saturday. And will be the registration for that conference should be live as this goes live. And really excited to have people come to the conference and learn more about it.
Awesome.
Yeah, we're excited about it.
Let's go.
Thanks so much, Carl.
All right, thanks so much for listening. We really hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Carl Youngblood. To find out more about the Mormon Transhumanist Association's annual conference, you can head to mtaconf.org. That's mtaconf.org. Carl was also generous enough to offer Faith Matters listeners a discount code. Just enter FMFRIEND, all caps, one word, for 20% off the ticket price. Big thanks to Carl for coming on, and that's it for this week. Thanks as always for listening, and of course, you can always check out more at faithmatters.org.